Hi, this is Dr. Scott Jensen. It's January 6th, 2023, and I want to talk today a little bit about Big Pharma and the whole world of pharmaceuticals. I wrote a book called We've Been Played, and in it I made this comment. I said, is there any motivation for Big Pharma to participate in the quest to fix a broken and expensive healthcare system so that patient needs once more become the primary consideration? Or is Big Pharma only interested in continuously expanding the size of the country's healthcare budget and appetite for drugs? What I was getting at there was Big Pharma benefits tremendously if we think of the budget that we spend on healthcare dollars in this country as a pizza that's maybe 10 inches in diameter. Big Pharma doesn't want that pizza necessarily reallocated. They want us to order a 16-inch pizza instead. Because if instead of a 10-inch pizza, we have a 16-inch pizza, there's a whole lot more dollars available. And that's what they're doing. And it isn't just pharmaceutical manufacturers that are involved. It's multiple levels. And one of the levels is pharmacy benefit managers. So PBMs are what they're called. And there's several big ones in the area, but we won't go into specifics. I'm not interested in that right now. But I want you to understand what happens. So let's take this bottle of pills, okay? What happens is the pharmacy locally buys a prescription drug from a wholesaler, a distributor, or a manufacturer for $10. So they buy it for $10. Then the pharmacy benefit manager that the pharmacy contracts with pays the pharmacy $8 for dispensing this medicine they bought for $10. So they paid $10, and they then submit the paperwork to the PBM, which works on behalf of your insurance company. So let's say John Doe is insured by Blue Cross, and so the pharmacy buys the drug for John Doe for $10, dispenses it to John Doe. John Doe doesn't have to pay for it because he has insurance. So the PBM, who works on behalf of Blue Cross, is who the pharmacy has to collect from. So they submit the paperwork and don't get $10, they get $8. What does PBM do? The PBM frequently will bill the health insurance plan, Blue Cross, $12 and get paid the $12. So the PBM pockets the $4 spread. They charged the insurance company $12. They paid the pharmacy $8. The pharmacy paid the wholesaler $10, and the patient didn't pay anything. That's just one of the convoluted ways that the escalating factors continue to drive the cost of healthcare up. But the reason I want to talk about Big Pharma today is because we've had a couple of things happen, and today, or in the last 48 hours, I believe that the FDA has now approved another biologic to be treated for dementia. That's going to be used for dementia. So I thought, well, let's talk about the last time we saw this happen. Do you remember? This was less than a year ago, but aducanumab, which is also called Aduhelm, it's made by Biogen. It's a drug to be used potentially for people with dementia. So this is an article by Jen Christensen with CNN from December 29th, 2022. And the title is House Investigation Says FDA Approval Process of Alzheimer's Drug Was Rife with Irregularities. Here's what it goes on to say. A congressional investigation found that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's atypical collaboration to approve a high-priced Alzheimer's drug was rife with irregularities. They go on to say, the report says that Biogen, that's the pharmaceutical manufacturer, set an unjustifiably high price for Aduhelm. So they got approval from the FDA. What did they set the price at? Per year, they set the price at $56,000 per year. $56,000, $5,000 a month, okay? There's more than 6.5 million people in the United States with Alzheimer's. That's 2% of our population. You got to understand that. So this investigation by Congress found that Biogen planned an aggressive marketing campaign to launch the drug. They intended to spend more than $3.3 billion on sales and marketing between 2020 and 2024. So in this 5-year span, they're going to spend more than $3.3 billion on marketing and sales. You have to ask the question, what did Biogen spend to develop this drug, this Aduhelm drug, $56,000 a year? They spent 2.5 times on the marketing and sales. In other words, they spent about $1.2 to $1.4 billion to develop it, and turned around and multiplied that by 2.5 to spend $3.3 billion on the sales and marketing. So is it the research and development part of the budget that's really cranking up the cost? No, it's the sales and the marketing. So Biogen initially discontinued Aduhelm's clinical trials way back in March of 2019. This is almost 4 years ago. Biogen was studying it. They discontinued Aduhelm's clinical trials after an independent committee found that it probably would not slow the cognitive and functional impairment that comes with dementia. So in other words, in March of 2019, they were sort of giving up on it. But 3 months later, in June of 2019, the FDA and Biogen started a working group to see whether or not the effort could be saved or salvaged. I have to ask the question, why was the FDA involved with this private pharmaceutical company to see if they could salvage this product? The investigation found that the FDA and Biogen engaged in at least 115 meetings, calls, and substantive emails discussions from July of 2019, when they started to try to resurrect it, to July of 2020. So over a 1-year period, 115 interactions, 40 meetings to guide Aduhelm's potential approval. The agency, the FDA, then collaborated with Biogen to draft a document used to brief an independent advisory committee that met in November of 2020. So 5 months after the FDA and Biogen start working together, they now are drafting a letter so that the advisory committee that's meeting in November of 2020 would have that available. At that meeting, none of the committee members voted to say that the studies presented strong evidence that the drug was effective at treating Alzheimer's disease. I want to repeat that. None of the members of this committee voted to say that there was strong evidence that the drug was effective. The meeting was unusual. According to one former FDA advisor, Dr. Aaron Kesselman told CNN in 2021 that the relationship between the FDA and the pharmaceutical company Biogen was out of the ordinary. He said, usually there's some distance between the FDA and the pharmaceutical company, the manufacturers. But on this one, the company and the FDA were fully in line with each other in support of the drug. Going on, when the FDA approved the drug, Kesselheim and 2 other members of the advisory committee resigned in protest. He later labeled it probably the worst drug approval decision in recent U.S. history. The FDA also made the approval for people with Alzheimer's disease, a far broader population than was studied in Biogen's clinical trials. In other words, they would be able to Biogen would be able to market its drug to a far bigger population, which is going to translate into more dollars. So to summarize, in the summer of 2021, the FDA provided accelerated approval. In January of 2022, 1 year ago, Medicare came out and said no coverage is going to be provided by Medicare unless the patient is in a clinical trial. Medicare wasn't buying it. Why? Because the phase 3 trials that had been used for Aduhelm revealed decreased amyloid, but there was no conclusion that cognition, that, if you will, our mental function was maintained. Remember, 3 members of that advisory committee resigned based on this decision-making process. This week, article from JAMA, December 27th, 2022. The title of the article is "The FDA Struggle to Withdraw Makena." It's written by Daniel Aaron, MD and JD out of Harvard Law School, Glenn Cohen, JD out of Harvard Law School, and Dr. Adachi, MD from the Department of Medical Science at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. This is what it says. Makena is a drug that's injected for the prevention of preterm birth. So in other words, we want to stop premature deliveries. We want to stop preemies if we can help, because it's expensive, and oftentimes preemies suffer health problems, premature babies suffer health problems, and we really want to minimize that. Preterm birth in America accounts for 75% of our perinatal mortality. Okay, so the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved Makena through its accelerated pathway in 2011. This article says, we discussed the controversy surrounding the current efforts of the FDA to withdraw Makena from the market. Why would they do that? Listen in. In 1975, a small clinical trial concluded that if we administered hydroxyprogesterone, which is what Makena is, during a pregnancy, it would lengthen the pregnancy and reduce neonatal mortality. The pharmaceutical manufacturer Adiva applied to the FDA for approval of hydroxyprogesterone for reducing the risk of preterm birth in women with a history of preterm birth. The FDA granted the accelerated approval, in 2011. Remember, the study trial was 1975. So literally 36 years later, we're now seeing the FDA grant the accelerated approval. An FDA report identified several statistical problems in the single study that supported approval, that 1975 study. The FDA report identified that the information and data do not provide convincing evidence of effectiveness. The report further suggested delaying approval, but that's not what happened. The FDA went ahead and provided accelerated approval, but it required the company to proceed with confirmatory trials so that we would know that it was being effective. This was supposed to be involved with enrollment and was to be completed in 2016. So they got the approval in 2011, and they were supposed to put forth more studies by 2016, 5 years later. The confirmatory trials didn't come forth in 2016. It was 2019, 3 years late. An advisory committee in 2019 concluded unanimously that the new trials did not confirm clinical benefit. Although the FDA has concluded that Makena, this hydroxyprogesterone, lacks substantial evidence of effectiveness, the manufacturer refused to withdraw the drug voluntarily and requested a hearing. After a 3-day hearing in October of 2022, 3 months ago, an FDA advisory panel voted 14-1 that Makena should be withdrawn. The current manufacturer of the drug, Covis, is vigorously contesting that action. The Makena story raises questions about the accelerated approval pathway's implicit promise. Approval can be provided on an expedited basis with the ability to quickly withdraw drugs that fail confirmatory trials. So in other words, if we're going to put something out there fast on an accelerated pathway, we have the right to expect confirmatory trials to be submitted relatively quickly so that we know indeed that this drug should and does warrant or deserve accelerated approval. The FDA has only once before exercised its authority to withdraw an accelerated approval indication against a company's wishes, and that was with the drug Avastin, which had been approved for use in the treatment of breast cancer. Attempts to withdraw a drug like Makena also put the FDA in a tough spot. So this article goes on to say, finally, withdrawal of a drug like Makena may place the FDA at odds with other agencies and organizations, potentially confusing the public. For example, the Center for Disease Control recommends that pregnant individuals with a history of preterm birth talk to their physicians about progesterone therapy. For patients, it is not obvious whether such a discrepancy with the FDA is due to bona fide scientific disagreement. So in other words, the FDA is trying to pull Makena off the market. The CDC encourages people with a history of preterm births to go ahead and talk to their doctors about getting this therapy, which the FDA is trying to withdraw. In the meantime, the pharmaceutical company is saying, we're not going to go quietly into the night. We want to continue to be able to reap profits. The delay in withdrawing McKenna has proven costly for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services particularly, because that's the population that would expand up our costs. They are taking part of that pizza that could go to mental health, could go to other areas, and isn't. We really need to pay attention to what's happening to Big Pharma. That's why I wrote about it so explicitly in my book, We've Been Played. You can get a copy of the book at drscottjensenbook.com, drscottjensenbook.com. Folks, we're in this together. We need to have everybody get some level of coverage. Mental health, emergency crises, appendicitis, cancer diagnoses. We have a limited budget. When I first went into medicine, the percentage of the gross national product that was going to healthcare was about 7%. It's closing in on 20%. 1 out of every $5 in our gross domestic product is being spent on healthcare. Pharmaceuticals are the largest, fastest driving force for healthcare inflation. So think about it. Big Pharma is feasting on us. Have a good weekend.